A few weeks ago, I shared a video on my social media sharing my Bibles, and it resonated with a lot of people. So I thought it could be interesting to do a longer video on here explaining in depth why I consider these books my Bibles and why they are so important to me. And I do want to start off by saying that this video has no religious intent, and also I do not mean to offend any religions. I just call these my Bibles because even though I don't really connect with any of the teachings in Christianity, I have always found the idea of carrying a Bible very romantic, just because I think I love the idea that a book can bring you so much. And I love a book that is well read and well worn and underlined and loved. And a Bible is definitely that. And I think for me it stands symbol for a book that you can go back to in hard times and always find something that inspires something inside of you. And that is what these books do for me. But like I said, there's no religious intent behind this. Sometimes I get the question do you believe in anything? Are you religious? And my answer is often that I consider myself spiritual, but I think that doesn't really cover it either. I just sort of pick practices and beliefs and just ideas about life from different religions and practices. And I think if I take an overall look at what these practices do or say, I would say that they all have to do with worshipping Mother Earth. I believe nature is here to take care of us, and we are supposed to take care of nature in return. I believe humans are just one of the many species that are here to share this earth and all its bounties. And I think we have forgotten that in this capitalist world we live in. That's why I can't connect to many of the mainstream religions, because they place humans in the world as the superior species that should rule over all others. And I don't agree with that. So I resonate a lot more with old pagan religions. For instance, I love the pagan celebrations and traditions of celebrating the coming of a new season, because I do believe we as humans should also be more in tune with the rhythm of nature and the change of the seasons, because we force ourselves to be the same in every season. We should be as productive in summer as in winter. We should be as inspired in summer as in winter. But I don't think that's right. The way nature retreats into itself in winter, takes rest, has a winter sleep. I think we humans are supposed to do that as well, but we push on and then we are surprised we get winter depression. I find that a really fascinating concept, and I think that comes back to a lot of beliefs from older religions and older types of wisdom that I find really inspiring. But all that being said, I do not consider myself overly religious. So that was the little religious disclaimer, and also a bit more information about how I look at the world and the universe. I think my voice is extra raspy today. I keep taking spoons of honey to make it better, but I don't know if it's working. So I apologize. I feel I say this every YouTube video. I think my voice just starts being raspy as soon as I feel the pressure of having to talk to the camera for a longer time, which is so stupid. But once again, I apologize for that. I do have a super professional setup today. I have a microphone and a professional camera, because my boyfriend is a photographer and videographer, so he has really good cameras, but somehow I just never use them. But today is the day, and hopefully it pays off and I will have amazing quality this time. Anyway, let's get into the books that I read religiously and consider my Bibles on life. Let's start with the most obvious one, because I talk a lot about this online, and this is Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, if that's how you pronounce it. As you can see, my copy is completely beat up, and that's because I took this with me everywhere for a year. It took me a year to read this one. And with that, I don't mean that I was reading this every day and I just literally was reading this every day for a year and that's how long it took me because I'm so slow. No, it was more that I was reading it and after a while I had to put it away. I felt like I had to reflect on the chapters I had read and internalize them before I could keep reading on. And I don't know, something inside me told me I had to read it that way. And after a while, I suddenly felt the call again that I needed to pick up this book. And every time this happened, it turned out the chapter was talking about something that really resonated with me at the time, which was insane. And that made reading this for me a religious experience, because every time I picked this up again, whether it was after a few days, weeks, or months, it turned out to be at the right moment, which was, I don't know, it was really special. Like I said, I talked a lot about this book online, and there's always a lot of discourse around this book because some people absolutely loved it, like me, and some people hated it or couldn't get through it. And there's also some controversy around this, which I will get into in a bit. But let me first start off with saying this is not an easy, fast read. It is dense, it is a little repetitive at times, and she uses quite like flowery language at points, which is a type of writing that I really enjoy, but you need to push a little to get through this at times. But I think it serves its purpose in this book because the repetition really makes you ingrain, is that a word? Ingrain the message into yourself. Like every time she repeats something, it feels like you're really listening to a teacher telling you something and really imprinting it on your mind, saying like, did you get this? Are you feeling this? And that made this really work for me. The setup of this book is that the author starts off every chapter with a folktale or fairy tale or myth, and that myth or story carries a message, and she dissects this message in the rest of the chapter and shares its teachings with you. And these teachings always emphasize the idea that women have like this wild ancient self inside of them that they need to recover, because we have lost that wild ancient self in our current world, and that's why so many women feel lost and disconnected. And of course that is also a direct result of the patriarchy. And this book talks about the role of women before the patriarchy a lot, in which women were seen as the guardians of life and death. Women give life, but they were also always there when people were leaving this earth and returning to dust, and they were there to guide them in this process. And in this role, women have a lot of wisdom. They have a lot of ancient knowledge that they can tap into because they are that connection to life and death. I have always found that an interesting concept, like the whole idea of femininity and what does it mean? What is women's role on this planet if we look past patriarchy, which is impossible for our brains because it's a thousands-year-old system that is so rooted inside of us that we cannot even comprehend what a world without it would look like, in a sense. Like we can imagine it, but even then I think a lot of our ideas and dreams will be rooted in patriarchy or escaping patriarchy, which goes beyond what my tiny little brain can comprehend, but I find it interesting to think about. And this book really just spurred that on and just taught me a lot of valuable lessons. There are 3 chapters that I resonated with most, which is the chapter on love, the chapter on creativity and inspiration, and the chapter on grief and like collective grief and collective female rage. That one actually made me cry because it's something I struggle with a lot. I can get so deeply angry and sad thinking about what has been taken from women basically for centuries and what the world could look like if history hadn't unfolded the way it did. And there was a chapter in this book that talks about that in such an affirming way. Let me see if I can actually find the passage. It's going to be hard because I marked so many pages. Okay, I found it. It says, women will become socially, politically, or culturally conscious, often find that they have to deal with a collective rage that seeps upward through them again and again. And when I read this, I was like, this explains so much because I have changed a lot in the past years. I've grown so much more aware of the world and how it operates and politics and all that stuff. And the more I learned, the more angry I found myself becoming. And I didn't always fully understand where that anger came from and if it was my own or someone else's. And more I've started to realize that this is not even an anger just about the current state of affairs in the world, but the affairs of the world centuries before us and just the way women have been treated all this time. I believe that every family has women in their generations before them that were treated very badly, that could not follow their dreams, that might have been abused, sexually abused, verbally abused, that have been kept small. And this sadness has built up with every generation. And here we are, the first generation of women that is free to do whatever they please. And now we suddenly sit here with all these feelings and emotions and a sort of guilt towards our ancestors for being able to do what we want, but feeling lost while doing it. And all these conflicting emotions exist together, and they make for an inner storm that I find it hard to deal with sometimes. I don't know if anyone else recognizes that, but a lot of the things this book talks about shed a lot of light on that for me. I think I have to stop talking about this book soon, otherwise I'm going to talk about it for hours, and I still have a pile to get through. But just a quick note on the controversy surrounding this book. When I talked with others about this book, some said that they were really troubled by its focus on motherhood and how a woman's life only holds value if you become a mother. That's like something they took from this book, and I personally did not get that. Like, she does talk about motherhoods in some parts, but I think because that's not something that is important to me, I just sort of glazed over that. But of course, I think being a woman or femininity does not equal motherhood or even being able to conceive. So that is something I absolutely do not stand with, but I think that's how you should read every piece of literature or consume every work of art. Take from it what resonates with you, take from it what you can learn from it, and always read critically. And if there's something you do not agree with or do not resonate with or you think is harmful, you can acknowledge that. Like, you can find a book amazing and important and still admit that there's parts in a book that are not how you see the world. It is also important to note that this book is written in the 90s and it's not as inclusive as it hopefully would be today. And that is also something I always find really important when you read a book. What time is it written in and what was the overall mindset in that time? And read critically from there. Like, you cannot expect a book written in, for instance, like the 40s or 50s to be as socially aware as a book that is written now, because we have learned since then. And I think it's unfair to expect a book to be as socially aware. All that being said, if you want to pick up this book, don't force yourself to read through it in one go. Allow yourself to put it aside every once in a while. I understand that that's sometimes scary because you think you might not come back to it. I definitely have that. I've put in books aside that I never came back to. But with this, I always found it calling to me again when I needed it. And I know that sounds super like spiritual and woohoo, and maybe I am a little spiritual in that sense. But yeah, even if this takes you 5 years to read, that's fine. It is dense, and I think sometimes you need some time away from it to not become overwhelmed, and so that you can really keep taking in the lessons that you can learn from this book. And I think there is a lot to learn from this book. Then I want to talk about 2 books that I can go through a little more quickly, and they are Useless Magic by Florence Welch and The Gods We Can Touch by Aurora. And these are 2 lyric books essentially, but they're also a look inside the mind of 2 very creative and inspiring artists, in my opinion. If you are someone with creative aspirations, I think you can learn so much just from looking at other artists and the way they work and the way they think. Not to copy it, but just to get inspiration from it. I do believe everything we create, like every artist, every writer, blah, 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 like every artist, every writer, every creator, I think nothing is completely original in itself. I think we always take inspiration from something. And it doesn't have to be other artists or older artworks, but it can be anything in life you take inspiration from. I think something new always has its roots in something old. And for me, a big part of the creative process is immersing myself in other works of art and sort of basking in the genius of others, and it recharges me. I'm sorry if I'm yapping a lot of nonsense in this video. This book specifically, Useless Magic, is one of those books that when I read it, it just fills me with such inspiration that I immediately want to pick up a pen or a paintbrush myself and start creating. Creating art sort of feels like the outcome of years of collecting, if that makes sense. And yeah, these books are just really important in that for me. I think Florence Welch is an absolute genius, and having a look inside her creative mind with this book is just such a joy and even a privilege. So this book is a collection of her lyrics, but also her paintings and collages and just things that inspire her. Like her entire style, it's everything I love. The religious influences, the pre-Raphaelite influences, the touch of like darkness and fairy tales that are in there. I absolutely love it. And Aurora's book is a bit more recent. I think it came out beginning of this year or the end of last year. And I'm not as familiar with her work as Florence's, but this book is essentially the same thing as Florence's book, and it's inspiring in the same way. It's a look inside her brain. Notes from her notebook in which she does research for her lyrics. There's notes on how she planned like the set list of her tour, which was really interesting. And also just a lot of like drawings and collages, and again, beautifully made. And whenever I feel uninspired, I just have to immerse myself in works of art that I enjoy for a little bit just to feel recharged, and I can go again. And these books really do that for me. There's also a lot of books with really good writing that immediately want to make me pick up the pen and write myself. And I love building up a little collection like that of books and works that are really important to me. So these definitely fall under that category. Then we have a book that I talked a lot about in my previous YouTube video, so I won't go too much into it. I only read this a few weeks ago, so it's more like a Bible to me. I've only read it once, so I don't think I can say this is one of my Bibles already, but it definitely holds a lot of potential to become one. This is Agua Viva by Clarice Lispector, and this is written as a stream of consciousness by a woman who tries not to talk about herself or the daily things that happen in life, but tries to grasp something bigger, the idea of what is. She tries to grasp time, and for me it really read like someone coming into like divine creative inspiration, maybe uncovering a part of herself that she keeps hidden. Almost had like a more esoteric, like witchy element to it that I really loved. And the most important thing is that the writing was just absolutely gorgeous. Like every little passage in this book reads like a poem on its own, and it really makes me want to read more by her. And I think this is just one of those books that I will come back to a lot when I want to feel inspired by really good writing. Like there's a few pages here where she just describes flowers, but she uses like a lot of metaphors, she gives them like a personality, and I just adore the way she looks at the world and can make meaning out of every little thing. And that's what I want to do in my writing, and it's just very inspiring to read. So like I said, definitely Bible potential here, and I just wanted to include it already because I think it's such a great work of art. Then we have M Train by Patti Smith, and I was not sure if I wanted to include Just Kids by her or this one. And in the end I went with this one because even though I think Just Kids is amazing and really inspiring, I just feel a deeper emotional connection to this book. Maybe because I read this while I was in Paris by myself for a week, which was a really like formative time for me because it was my first trip alone, and it just felt like I really came into my own during that week. And since this is the book that I read there, it just really connects to that time for me. But I also think Patti Smith is a creative genius, and in this book she really explores the act of writing about nothing, which is like an art in its own. But again, I'm so impressed when people can make observations about life where others would just rush past. A writer managed to see the moment for what it is and can catch it and put it into words so that other people can experience that same moment as it was, or at least as it was perceived by the author, which I think is so beautiful because I try to write like this sometimes, but it's really much harder than you think to describe a moment like that. It's such an art on its own, and this book really embodies that for me, and there's just such a melancholic quality to this book that I really adore, and it's just one I want to keep coming back to over and over and over again, and I cannot fully explain why, but it's just what it is, so that's why it's on my list of Bibles. Just to be fully transparent, I haven't finished this book yet, but I have already put it on my list of Bibles for good reason. This is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and this rarely have I connected with a book as this one, and I'm not even far in yet. Like, where am I? I am 130 pages in, and I've already cried so many times. Robin Wall Kimmerer comes from one of the indigenous tribes in the United States, and in this book she shares the teachings of indigenous wisdom and the indigenous connection to nature that I think is so insanely beautiful. And I think if everyone in the world would think like she does, or like indigenous people do, about the world, I think it would be a much better place. Since I have not finished it, I cannot vouch for all of the contents, of course, but I truly believe everything will be amazing. Not only the things that she shares are extremely valuable, but also the way she writes is beautiful. It is very poetic at times and very raw in other places where it needs to be. So far, I think what got me most is where she talked about language, because in the mostly forgotten languages of indigenous people, the word it does not really exist in the same way that we use it. Like, if we see a frog, we would call it an it. We would say like, oh my god, there's a frog, it's sitting on a lily pad. And in their language, every living being, and that also includes plants, flowers, mushrooms, whatever, is a she or a he. And the author explains how the English language is made to create distance between us humans and the natural world, which I found so eye-opening, because if you talk about an it, you feel so much more distant to it. Like, you do not connect to it at all because it's an it. It's not real. It doesn't concern us. It's just an it. But if we're talking about her or him, we feel so much more connection to it, and we see it more as something that is worthy of life. And I think it's a little different in languages like Italian or Spanish or French, and I'm sure many others, that give a gender to things as well. It goes a little further in indigenous languages, where they would ask, for instance, if they encounter a tree, they would ask, who is that, instead of what is that? And I don't think they do that in Italian or Spanish. So they really respect other living things as something living, which is so beautiful. Like for instance, here she says, if a maple is an it, we can take up the chainsaw. If a maple is a her, we think twice. Just because we don't think of them as humans doesn't mean they aren't beings. Isn't it even more disrespectful to assume that we're the only species that counts as persons? The arrogance of English is that the only way to be animate, to be worthy of respect and moral concern, is to be human. I already know this is going to be such an important book in my life. I want to apply a lot of the teachings to my real life and how I connect with nature and how I treat it. Like for instance, there's also another chapter where she talks about this pond that she has in the backyard, and she has 2 daughters and they wanted to swim in that pond. But the pond was completely overgrown with like algae, if that's how you call it, and like plants and all that stuff. And the author starts clearing out the pond, but at some point she realizes she's killing a lot of life in that pond, like even tiny little bacteria that live in there or tiny little insects. She's killing them by clearing out the pond. And then she asks herself, like, who is she to decide who is more worthy? Just because she has more physical power than them, does that mean that she should choose her own daughters over the daughters of insects? And I just think that's such a beautiful way of looking at the world. And yeah, I'm reading this the same way as I did Women Will Run with the Wolves, by just picking it up every now and then when I feel the need to, but not continuously reading, because I think that would be overwhelming. So this might also take me a year to finish, but I'm completely fine with that. I know I will finish it one day, and I know I will reread it many times after that as well. And then we have come to the last book, which is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I think this is one of the very few books that creative people can agree on is actually helpful. I feel like there's a lot of books out there that teach you how to find your creative self, how to create, how to become successful as an artist, blah, blah, blah. But I've mostly only seen positive things about this one from actual artists. This book does not only share theory and does not only share lessons and does not only tell you to get off your ass and create, but actually shares exercises to create that routine for yourself in which you are able to create. And I think that's something I'm missing in my life, because I think a mistake a lot of people make, which is one I make as well, is that you only create when you feel inspired. And unfortunately for me, that happens only like once every 3 months. So I'm currently trying to write a book, but I only feel inspired like once every 3 months. So that's going extremely slow. And this book is there to help you keep that creative flow going, basically. I think my favorite lesson from this book is the morning pages. I need to start applying this again. I'm just talking about this book without applying any of the things, so I feel kind of like a fraud, but I've done it for a while. The morning pages is basically the idea that every morning you take out your notebook and you just write for like, I don't know how long it was, like 10 minutes or something. Write non-stop for 10 minutes without taking your pen off the page. Just write down whatever comes into your brain. It doesn't need logic, it doesn't need grammar, nothing. But you are writing to get to the point in your subconscious when you are free to draw from it and create whatever. And the longer you do this practice, the easier it gets to get to that point of easy creation. And oh my god, just talking about this, I know I have to get back to this because I'm currently in such a creative rut and I'm finding it really hard to sit down and find that place within me where I can create, even though it's all I want in life. Like, I feel so much inspiration bubbling inside of me, but somehow I have no way to express it right now, and it builds so much frustration. I don't know if somebody else recognizes this, but if you want to create, but somehow you cannot bring yourself to, but you have the ideas and sort of like a vision there on the back of your mind, but you just don't know how to make it a reality, the frustration that brings drains your energy like nothing else. And I'm currently in that state and I'm not sure how to get out of it. I'm also trying to grant myself some time and patience because I did just move to another country. I still have to find my routine, my rhythm, my own like sort of things here. So of course I cannot find a lot of time to sit down and create, but God, I want to so bad. I know there's so much potential inside of me and I'm not using it, and it scares me and it's frustrating. And it feels like I'm running out of time, even though that's stupid, but I'm sure a lot of people out there can relate. So that's what I'm currently going through, and this is inspiring me to pick this back up again. It's one of my Bibles for a reason. Every time I get into this state, I'm suddenly like, the artist's way. I don't know, just reading her words, it feels like a loving grandmother who is telling you sweetly but firmly what you need to do to get back out there. And I need that. Definitely Bible worthy. There's one book I quickly want to mention, but I do not have it here physically, so I cannot see the stuff I underlined and stuff. But that is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. It's one of those really tiny black penguin classics. Really short read, but also so inspiring, especially if you feel lost in your 20s. It's aimed at people that want to be artists, but even if you don't want to be, I think it is very affirming to read. The book is a correspondence of letters between Rainer Maria Rilke and this other person that I forgot the name of, a young guy who wrote to Rilke to ask for advice on how to become a great poet like him. And the whole book is just a correspondence between them and Rainer Maria Rilke giving that advice. And it's so good, it's so affirming, and it's so soothing in a way that I definitely consider that book one of my Bibles as well. It was just so tiny that it got lost in between all the moving stuff, and it's still in the Netherlands, I think. But I cannot wait to get it back here and just browse through that one again. So I think that's the last one I want to mention. I hope this video inspired you to pick up some of these books yourself, or in the very least to think about what books do this for you, like what books you consider your Bible, which ones you find yourself coming back to every time to find inspiration or support or lessons or something like that. If you have those books, please let me know in the comments, because I'm always looking for more inspiring books to read. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this longer bookish video of me. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye!